The federal carbon tax is ruled constitutional, Canada requests America's assistance with China, and an Italian student is tortured in Egypt. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. We've got a lot to talk about today, so let's just jump right into it. We'll start off by talking about the oh-so-controversial carbon tax. Recently, it was ruled to be constitutional, aka it's allowed. For those of you who didn't know, the carbon tax works by essentially placing a fee on emissions. This applies throughout the entire value chain, so from fuel producers to distributors like gas stations and other emitters are subject to a tax per each ton of carbon dioxide they emit. The rate of the taxation will go up as time goes on, and that's supposed to incentivize industry and consumers to wean their dependence away from carbon polluting industries and move on to environmentally friendly practices. One of the immediate downsides to this carbon tax plan has been the cost to everyday consumers. The increase in prices because of the tax has been passed off to consumers like you and me, and you can see that most clearly in the increase in gas prices. Things have gone to astronomical heights recently, over $1.30 per liter of regular gas, and if you're driving a premium car, you better be making that dough, because you're going to be looking to spend nearly $2 per liter. Prices have just skyrocketed in most parts of Canada. The argument is made by opposers that it's unfair to citizens, and especially low-income households who can barely keep up with the price increase. Now we'll bring our focus to Saskatchewan, because that's where the ruling was held that declared that the carbon tax was indeed constitutional. Saskatchewan's premier, Scott Moe, attempted to strike down the carbon tax in a court of appeal, and it was really a close legal battle. The courts ruled 3-2 in favor of the federal government, and thus the carbon tax remains. The 3-2 ratio there just means essentially that 3 justices voted in favor of it and 2 voted against it, and that really goes to show you just how divided and controversial a topic like this is. There was no unanimous consensus, and it came down to literally a single vote. As you are probably aware of now, the main argument against the carbon tax was whether or not it was constitutional, and the crux of the contention came down to the premier's feeling that the federal government didn't have the power to mandate a provincial minimum on the carbon tax. In other words, the provinces felt like they should be able to set the tax at whatever rate they felt was most appropriate, and they didn't appreciate Justin Trudeau mandating it across the board. You can already see the motivations on both sides of this argument here. First of all, if there was no minimum, then the people who oppose the tax would look to place it as close to rock bottom as possible. The premiers who do support it would get undercut, and that would create an imbalance of powers as companies become incentivized to relocate to provinces with more tax-free policies. Just think about it. Saskatchewan, they don't want the carbon tax, and if you force them to adopt it, as well as gave them the power to pick a rate, they will probably pick something along the lines of 0.000001 cents per ton of carbon dioxide. And the province that did support it would pick a more appropriate rate. That's where you see the federal government's perspective. They were looking to avoid that, and all of this would basically come down to standardizing a rate across the board so it was consistent throughout Canada. On top of all that, it was, after all, the federal government's proposal, and second, they want to ensure it's carried out according to their vision. That requires a certain standard so they can meet their goals. Now, it boils down to the power question. The provinces are supposed to hold a large degree of freedom, which is anointed to them within the Constitution in terms of how they want to govern their land. They have major says in things like education, healthcare, and all that stuff. So they are raising the question as to why it was any different when it comes to environmental policies. They are not simply pawns to the federal government, but they are still subject to certain limitations. It's really a balancing act. Now, let's look at the Constitution to see what that says, because that's the document that's being held in question here. What it says is, the federal government's ruling can supersede that of the provinces in the name of peace, order, and good government. You can think of these 3 pillars as the equivalent to the America's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We hold these in high regard, and it grants the federal government the power to pass laws based on those criteria, despite whether or not the provinces agree with it. But hold on a second. Right there you can see why the issue isn't black and white. Thank you to the Constitution writers for making things so vague and open to interpretation. The terms used here, there's no way that you can get a concrete definition from them, and oftentimes they can be argued in any which way, which is definitely the case here. You have those who are interpreting the three terms differently than others who are supporting the bill, and it's resulting in a large argument. So let's look at them. Within the individual silos, you could say they make sense, but when applied to abstract topics, they don't neatly fit into those terms. It becomes a point of contention. So, for example, let me illustrate. The pillar of peace. For example, if there's a civil war brewing, the federal government can step in and stop it as they see fit under their constitutional powers. That makes sense, and it's clearly in support of their constitutional rights. How about order? And how about good government? Those are a little bit harder to define. What constitutes a good government? A lot of deep thinking and philosophy are needed to answer questions like that. You can really make the argument that carbon tax fit those, and you can also make the argument that it doesn't. You really get a microcosm of the voting and disagreements in real time with how the dispersion of the votes went. 3 court justices felt like the carbon tax does fall within the context of the Constitution, and 2 didn't, hence the split vote. One politician claims that climate change is an issue of national concern, and that pollution knows no borders. Hence, that's why they need to tackle it as a country. This is in defense of the carbon tax. And that's where I kind of draw an interesting parallel. See, I agree with what the politician is saying here. Climate change is a massive issue. I'm an environmental supporter. Tackling it as a nation is what I believe in. But to assume that the carbon tax is either the only way or the right way is completely disingenuous to me. This is where I believe a misunderstanding is occurring and is creating massive ripples amongst the parties. Saying carbon tax does not necessarily equate to environmental action. Carbon tax is simply just one theory on how to tackle the problem as a whole. It's a function of the issue. The debate here shouldn't be about action or no action. The truth is, it's about whether or not the carbon tax is the most effective tool we have at our disposal. Of course, you have those people who generally do not care at all about the environment, and they'll be more than happy to shut down every environmental plan. But I don't believe that applies to the entire parties here. The carbon tax itself is controversial because it's not clear that it accomplishes all the things that it sets out to do, and it's not without major drawbacks. Ask yourself, has the carbon tax made oil companies produce less due to higher costs? No, they've passed the expense onto you, the consumer. Have you driven less due to the increase in gas? Well, maybe, but a lot of people don't have that luxury as they need to get to work, drop their kids off to activities, and oftentimes, public transit isn't what it needs to be. In Ontario, you have places like Toronto with the TTC network, which is positive and good, but it's not the same situation for other places, and it's very difficult to get anywhere without a car. The list goes on, and if you look at the end goal here, it's debatable if the carbon tax is having the effects that people hope for, which is to reduce pollution and make the earth a little bit cleaner. On top of that, you have the side effect of crippling lower income families who could barely afford to make ends meet before, but now with the carbon tax, their basic means of getting to places and their cost of living has skyrocketed. Of course, there's always the income rebate you get, the environmental tax refund, but to a lot of these families, they're living paycheck to paycheck and they can't wait around waiting for that rebate. It's adding additional stress to them, and you could argue it's not fair. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. I think we need to explore more policies and create a wide variety of tools that we can choose to deploy and not to deploy. We need more options. So, back to the constitutional rights argument. I'm pretty torn on this. I think the most accurate statement is that it can be argued both ways, and it's not really clear whether or not it's truly constitutional. The 3-2 split is the perfect representation of that. Of course, I'm going to give you my opinion, and I've come to the conclusion, after thinking about it, I'm leaning towards saying that it is constitutional under the term good government. That's the third pillar that allows the federal government to enact a law, and I believe a good government has a certain degree of responsibility towards environmental sustainability. I hear the opposition's arguments of, is the carbon tax even the right approach, and what are the right numbers to charge? Currently, it's set at $20 per ton of carbon dioxide emissions, and is going to raise $10 annually until 2022. They're saying these numbers are not fair, they're arbitrary, and they haven't had much input onto them. I believe more discussions are needed, and that's also another sign of good government. Having conversations and talking to your premiers. That doesn't seem to have happened either. The policies are fairly unpopular, and they need to be talked out to find a compromise. Maybe the numbers are too high, maybe there's a better path. Both of those seem to be pretty realistic and reasonable arguments for me. This is where I think the premiers went wrong. Trying to argue that it's not constitutional really isn't going to go anywhere, I feel. It's so debatable, and it's open to subjective interpretation most times with terms like these. The more pragmatic approach, I feel, would be to say the carbon tax is not effective, and at the same time, they have to come up with a solution and a different proposal that they can put forth to replace it. That's a more concrete path to me. Dismissing the idea, giving rationale why, and coming up with a better solution. That's an approach I feel that most Canadian citizens can get behind. Arguing whether or not it's constitutional, I personally think it is. You might not agree with that, but it's not a fruitful conversation to be having. Instead, let's talk about why we don't like the policy, and let's talk about how we can make things better. That's what I feel the government should be going towards. The Saskatchewan Premier plans to appeal that decision by the appeals court to the Supreme Court of Canada, so he's going one step higher. We'll really have to see how the Supreme Court interprets the situation. I personally feel like it's not going to be very different. It's going to come down to another split vote. This time it might be in their favor, or it might not be, but we'll just have to see. So Doug Ford and all the other premiers who oppose it are united in their denunciation of this result, and they're also looking to undergo legal battles themselves as they try to oppose the legislation further. If I had to make a ruling, I would essentially say that it does seem constitutional to me. It's not the right argument to be having, and maybe we should rethink our course of action. It's caused a lot of discourse, and the carbon tax is simply not the only thing we have at our disposal here, and striking down the carbon tax is not the same as striking down environmental stewardship. There are other things we can do, so let's talk about that. Let's be open to discussion, and we should really change our mindsets here. It's really us versus the problem, not me versus you and the problem is somewhere else out there. We all have the same goal, I feel, trying to make the world a better place. So let's talk about how we can do that together. It's us and you fighting a common enemy, the destruction of the planet. We don't want to be compounding the issue and making it more complicated than it has to be. It's really just getting silly at this point, if I'm going to be honest. So that sums up the latest on the carbon tax debacle. Now we're going to move on to Canada and the United States. Canada requested that America help with our China crisis, or they can forget about future favors. This article comes from Reuters, and it's expressing the frustration Canada has felt as of late. I'm going to go over the situation in a quick summary. I've talked about it extensively on the show. It's really such a deep situation, but in a nutshell, Huawei, a Chinese telecom company, is caught up on charges of data spying and breaking the law. America wants to prosecute their CFO, Meng. She resides in Canada, and we detain her on extradition grounds. She has a court hearing coming up this month, and we've treated her fairly, but it's likely she gets sent to the States to face charges. China is angry at Canada, and the States too, but they can't bully America as hard as they can bully Canada. So the Chinese government sets their sights and starts applying pressure to Canada. They put 2 Canadians on death row. They were both drug traffickers, but still Canadians, sending a message. They've detained and tortured 2 other Canadians. They've decimated our canola exports, and now they've blocked other items, including soybeans and pork. We heavily rely on China as a trading partner, and they are letting their frustrations be felt by us. I've had criticisms from abroad about my realistic views of the situation, and my response to anyone who refuses to believe China is doing something here is to look at the facts. Of course, China is going to deny these things, and they're going to say there's no relation to their actions and Huawei, but they're just playing coy. There is something called context, and it has to be read into here. They are abusing their power and trying to strong-arm us into giving in to their whims. Canada has every right to feel annoyed right now too, because the United States are seemingly having washed their hands of us and left Canada out to dry. As our export markets get killed continually, the United States, one of the very few world powers who can actually push back against China, has not lifted a finger to help us out. We're in this whole debacle largely because we've been assisting America with their extradition request. America saying they are concerned about Canada isn't doing anything for us. They need to take action and put up tariffs, restrictions, and even embargoes if it comes to it. Last week, Trump threatened Cuba to back off from contributing to the chaos in Venezuela, or America would obliterate their trade relations. Where is that same fire with China? On top of this, the States hit us earlier with tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Canada just keeps getting shafted and shafted. Apparently, Trudeau has hinted that if America doesn't do anything to help shield us, we might have to rethink helping them out in the future. Now, I think that's a good start, but it's so weak. We need a leader who can dominate and assert themselves. This whole hinting at something isn't going to do anything for us either. You need to be upfront with America. They've proven time after time that that's how you have to approach them to get anything done. This whole situation has just been top-class foolishness. It's like you ask your friend to back you up in a fight, and you run away as soon as they're getting their ass beat. It's not honorable, and it's not the right thing to do. We need support to make this better for us. If left alone, we're going to get to a critical point, and after that, the issue is going to spiral beyond any remedy. We need America to back us up. Turn up trade pressures, halt imports of Chinese products, maybe even get them kicked out of the World Trade Organization for their deliberate misuse of power. If they can't help us, the way I see it, we don't have any reason to continue to back them further, and that has to be made clear. This is not how you treat a country who has laid it on the line to assist you. I've said this from the very beginning. This is not new. The path forward has been crystal clear, but we've diverged onto the road of chaos and we've been left to our own devices, sitting ducks essentially. This is not how you treat your allies, and it has to be pointed out. America must realize that if Canada continues to get the pressure put up on them, I fully expect us to crack. China is a giant and we can't stand up to them ourselves, no matter how high of an expectation we have of Canada. It's simply not realistic. We need support, and if it's not given to us, Miss Meng might be able to get set free and return to China, which doesn't serve the United States perspective either. We really are a team, but it hasn't been playing out like that. It's highly unfortunate, and I hope that a change is coming because we need relief immediately. Now we're going to head to Egypt for our final story of the day. According to multiple sources, Egyptian police arrested and beat an Italian student who was later found murdered. Why? The going testimony is that they thought he was a British spy. The student's name was Giulio Reneghi, and he was a 28-year-old doctoral researcher from Britain's Cambridge University. He disappeared in Cairo in 2016, and the case has been evolving ever since then. The student was investigating government repression of labor unions, and it's suspected that his research played a part in his murder. Italian prosecutors are pressing Egyptian authorities for more information to shed some light on just exactly what happened here as they seek justice for Giulio. Currently, we know that his body was found by a roadside, bearing extensive marks of torture, and Cairo has been insufficiently cooperating with the investigation. Their first story that they gave to authorities was that the student died in a traffic accident. Later, when the evidence mounted and people knew it wasn't true, they changed their tale to say he was killed by a criminal gang. And after that, the entire gang was wiped out by police in a shootout, so there's no one left to question. How convenient. That seems legit, right? There's definitely something fishy going on here, and all of the evidence is pointing to a government cover-up. It's completely disgusting what happened here, and the alibi reeks of lies. The UN lays out very clear rules about the prohibition of torture. It's unacceptable, and if Egypt is found to be in violation of this, it will put them in very hot water. I'm baffled as to even why a party would feel threatened by a PhD student doing research. To me, there's only one reason why you'd want someone like that silenced. He stumbled onto something that they didn't like, and they were worried that he was going to discover or say something further. I'm hoping the case proceeds swiftly and we uncover the truth. If the Egyptian government is behind this, as the evidence seems to point towards, then I'm in full support of massive punishments to fall upon them, as there is simply no place for actions like this in today's world. On the other side, if it's a different party responsible, they should be tried in the highest courts and deliver the greatest penalties, because this is truly a disgusting act of evil. Just imagine it. If the current thesis is correct and they thought he was a spy for some reason, he was tortured. You can just think of what they were saying to him. Tell us everything you know. Who do you work for? What kind of intel are you looking for, etc. And if he was just a regular student, you're scared out of your mind. You don't even know what they're talking about as they continue to beat and torture you. You have nothing to say, so they have no information that they're getting from you. Then they see you're worthless and they kill you. Completely disgusting. And the crazy part is, even if he was a spy, this is still not the proper protocol. You can't torture them under any circumstances. This is what the UN dictates, and they are a member of that union. Completely shameful and disgusting if it went down the way it's been described to have. Now, before we end the show, I just want to plug my Twitter account. I just made it, and I currently have 0 followers. So if you guys want to follow me, I would greatly appreciate the support. My handle is at Perri Platform, at PerriPlatform, Perri Platform. You can get all the latest updates from me. You'll know instantly when my episodes are up. And if you want to have some fun, you can see me calling out and engaging with various news accounts and pointing out the BS they talk about sometimes getting into some fun conversations online and all that good stuff. So give me a follow and you won't regret it, I hope. So thanks for joining me on the Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.